Amanda from Pontes Books here to look at the fun fact for chapter 16 of The Prince and the Pauper. Today's fun fact is focusing on a smaller element of chapter 16, but one that is pretty famous modern day. So today we're taking a look at the crown jewels. So the crown jewels really refer to many different objects that are used within the palace that have been passed down through many different monarchs. And a few of them get referenced in this chapter. We'll have more that come up in the actual coronation chapter. But since we have a little bit of mention of them in this chapter, we'll focus on them here. So in chapter 16, we have this quote: "Next comes the chancellor, between two, one of which carries the royal scepter, the other the sword of state, in a red scabbard, studded with golden fleur-de-lis, the point upwards." So here we have them being used not as part of a coronation, which is kind of what the crown jewels are more typically known for, but these are just a part of another ceremony. So in this case, it's preparing for kind of a royal banquet. We see some of these objects coming out as well. So a royal scepter and the sword of state being referenced here. So what we're going to focus on are just some of the more famous crown jewels and objects that contain the crown jewels that are the most famous today. So probably one of the more famous one is St. Edward's crown. So this is the most sacred of all the crowns in the crown jewels, and it's only used in moments of crowning, and originally was made for the coronation of Charles II. You'll notice in the picture, if you look at a picture of it, at the bottom it features ermine, which is a fur that we featured in one of our previous videos, fur that was very commonly used in royal objects. Also, an interesting fact about this is that originally the stones and gems that were featured on this crown actually didn't remain there permanently. They were actually just kind of borrowed and then returned after the coronation. And the crown itself would just have those kind of empty gaps in there in between coronations, and they weren't permanently added until 1911. Another object that's a part of the crown jewels is the sovereign's orb. So it contains many of the original gemstones that have always been on it, and it is a symbol of the Christian world, and that can be seen by its shape. It is a globe with a cross mounted on top of it, so that's representing the Christian world and the part that the royal family and the monarchs played in that religion. And as a part of the actual ceremony, it is placed in the monarch's right hand before being placed on the altar. And that would be in the actual coronation ceremony. So most of these that we're featuring have to do with the coronation. Then there's the jeweled sword of offering. This is presented to a new monarch as part of a collection of ornaments. So there are also bracelets and some other things that are kind of ornamental objects that they'll wear on their person. So the symbolism of the sword is that the monarch is meant to protect good and punish evil. So this sword kind of represents that ability to protect and punish. And as part of the ceremony, the sword is fastened around the king's waist. A queen wouldn't actually wear it. It was only put on kings. Then we have, it should be the sovereign scepter and rod. Cut off that last word there. So the monarch receives one of these in each of their hands before being crowned. And the idea of this staff symbolizes the monarch's pastoral care for his or her people. So kind of caring for the people like a shepherd cares for sheep, often carrying a staff as well. So that's kind of the symbolism behind that object. And there's different scepters with things on top of them. One of them is the scepter with the cross, and that's been used at every coronation since Charles II. So we see that kind of as a reoccurring pattern here, is that a lot of these items really date back to Charles II. And then one of the newer items, but one of the, I guess, kind of more famous ones, is another crown, the Imperial State Crown. And this is one that contains many different historic jewels. So there's a couple jewels in there particular that have a lot of history behind them. And then this is actually the crown that a monarch wears as they leave Westminster Abbey after a coronation. So that would probably be why this one is pretty famous, because those are usually big events, obviously, in England. And it contains all sorts of jewels, but notably it contains 2,868 diamonds, which is just crazy. And if you can see in a picture of it, it's got a lot of diamonds that are covering most of the surface. So then just a couple more fun facts about the crown jewels. So the oldest item is actually from the 12th century, and that is the coronation spoon. Probably not one that gets a whole lot of recognition, but that is the oldest item. And the crown jewels are obviously a collection of precious and semi-precious stones. And there are actually 23,578 of them. But we see them embedded into objects. So it's not just a bunch of stones sitting there in a pile. If you ever get the chance to go to London and see the crown jewels, I'm not positive that all of them are on display, but there's quite a lot of things that you can see. It's not just a pile of jewels, it's stones that have been embedded into objects for the most part. So it's 140 objects that are actually embedded with those crown jewels. And then just also another interesting fact is they have been stolen and ultimately found again. And the person who did steal them was actually pardoned and ended up getting land and wasn't really punished too harshly for stealing these crown jewels. So once upon a time, they used to be housed in Westminster. Now you can still go see them in London. They're not in Westminster Abbey anymore, but that is just a little bit of information about kind of the modern day crown jewels. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.